There is no greater measure of pop cultural ubiquity than being parodied by somebody with a national audience. Certain milestones of mockery that, if you reach them, you know you've made an impact, at least for a time. A caricature of yourself on the cover of The New Yorker, for instance. A song you wrote being parodied by Weird Al. An imitation of you appearing on Saturday Night Live. But for celebrities making a name for themselves in the 1990s, there was no greater honor, no more conclusive sign that you had penetrated the cultural consciousness than being parodied in an episode of Animaniacs.
Well, do you know how we can raise some big money fast?
Well, if you have a spare bedroom at home, you might try renting it out. Hey!
Stallone cut steel for a major reel.
Means Rocky #6, so beware.
Wacko lost his lunch in Robert Benchley's hat. Did I mention that Milton Berle didn't get along with Yakko?
Plenty of people saw versions of themselves animated into the show during its mid-90s run on Fox. Politicians, musicians, and film stars alike. So, if you learn that the show took the time to parody 3 opera singers, you already know that those singers have really made a name for themselves.
La donna immobile, qual piuma al vento, muta d'accento, e di pensiero, sempre una amabile.
What is this?
Must be the Canadian national anthem.
For all you young millennials out there who lived through the Clinton years in a state of childish ignorance, you may have already heard of the Three Tenors. A rare example of a classical music act breaking through to the mainstream. What began with 3 of the best-known operatic tenors giving a benefit concert ballooned into 2 national tours, 4 albums, 34 concerts, and a fervent discourse around the cultural and financial ramifications of singing La Donna Immobile in a baseball stadium.
La donna immobile, qual piuma al vento.
But the story of the Three Tenors is much more than a story of just 3 tenors. A once-in-a-lifetime recital did not evolve into an internationally renowned touring act overnight. The question of how and why the tenors were able to command such a wide audience is a fascinating one to dig into. And so, like the voices of the tenors, let us rise to the occasion. In a 1996 episode of Seinfeld, this exchange is shared between George and Elaine.
I spilled wine on his 8x10 photo of one of his favorite Italian opera stars.
Who?
You know the 3 tenors?
Yeah, Pavarotti, Domingo, and the other guy.
The other guy.
So memorable was the joke that when the other guy retired in 2017, a New York Times article about his farewell tour literally began with, "To many people whose knowledge of opera began and ended with the Three Tenors juggernaut, he was known, in the words of a memorable Seinfeld episode, as the other guy, the tenor who wasn't Luciano Pavarotti or Placido Domingo. But to those who heard Jose Carreras in his prime, he was unforgettable in his own right." And yet, 6 years before that episode aired, the achievement Carreras was perhaps best known for had little to do with opera. Certainly, Carreras had fundamentally established himself by that point as one of the world's most beloved singers, which all came to a halt in 1987 when he was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, a cancer with only a 1 in 10 chance of survival. Carreras underwent 11 months of treatment at Seattle's Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, which ended, miraculously, in Carreras making a full recovery. This was one of many factors that led, 2 years later, to a concert in Rome. The 3 singers, Carreras, Placido Domingo, and Luciano Pavarotti, had been asked to sing together before, more than 50 times according to Pavarotti. But in 1990, as a way for Domingo and Pavarotti to welcome their little brother back to the stage following his recovery, the trio finally agreed. Of course, it helped that the concert was scheduled for July 7th, 1990, the night before the FIFA World Cup final in Italy. As all 3 men were obsessive football fans, the concert would celebrate both Carreras and the sport. In fact, during the BBC's coverage of the World Cup, they had used Pavarotti's recording of the aria Nessun Dorma as the de facto theme for the tournament. The event was expected to be a massive success from the initial planning. Decca scored the recording rights for CD and VHS releases, PBS planned to broadcast the concert live from Rome, and the city police even rerouted both car and airplane traffic to ensure there would be no sound pollution in the illustrious Baths of Caracalla that evening. 6,000 tickets were sold with a top price of $360, with proceeds going to support the newly founded Josef Carreras International Leukemia Foundation. Plus, the singers had already agreed to donate their cut of the box office receipts as well. The music was arranged by veteran composer Lalo Schifrin, better known today for composing the Mission Impossible theme, as well as other hits for film and TV. Because very few operas contain songs written for 3 tenor voices, Schifrin's trio arrangements were mostly tenor solos broken up into sections, alternating between the 3 and occasionally including a few notes of harmony. Schifrin's arrangements would be performed by a 198-piece orchestra, a combination of 2 groups, the Maggio Musicale Fiorentino and the Teatro dell'Opera di Roma. Leading them was conductor Zubin Mehta, the music director for the New York Philharmonic and a chief conductor for the Maggio Musicale Fiorentino. And it's important to mention, in the marketing for this first concert, Mehta is given equal billing alongside the tenors. Yes, the initial CD release was titled Carreras Domingo Pavarotti in Concert, but the importance of Mehta to the proceedings was repeated by the tenors in interviews.
We are lucky, the 3 of us, that we can have Zubin with us. There are other conductors, but to have that kind of feeling and the enthusiasm that he has in every rehearsal, I mean, it's something that we need.
Mehta is also the only one of the quartet to remain on stage nearly the entire time. The singers spend about an hour alternating solos, only appearing as a trio during the final 30 minutes. But what really stands out rewatching the concert is just how much fun everyone's having. If there's a mood that encapsulates the concert, it's probably one of casual camaraderie. Yes, the music is difficult and the artists highly skilled, but despite the formal tuxedos, there's an overwhelming sense that ties have been loosened, so to speak. The tenors bask in the adoration of the crowd, smiling as they roll through a program of songs from their own personal repertoires, including, as befits the moment, a reprise of Nessun Dorma for Pavarotti.
Nessun dorma.
There are even noticeable errors in the concert, none of which take away from the performance. Despite the rerouted air traffic, a rogue airplane did fly over the concert during an instrumental in Carreras' opening aria, Lamento di Frederico. Carreras responded with characteristic chill. Pavarotti also makes an error during the encore of O Sole Mio, continuing when he should pass the song off to Domingo. That encore also includes possibly the best moment of the entire concert. Pavarotti, having already sung the song earlier that evening, decides to spice up the reprise by showing off with a little trill during a fermata. Then we see Domingo and Carreras talking amongst each other, and when it's their time to jump in, in short, the Rome concert is nothing more or less than exactly what it aims to be. A joyful meeting of 4 artists and friends, enjoying each other's company while doing what they were all built to do. The final encore of Nessun Dorma, shared by all 3, is clearly unplanned, with Mehta having to mime the song to the orchestra, and the tenors improvising the order of who will jump in next. The program is a good balance of famous arias with popular folk songs and a few contemporary tracks thrown in for balance.
Sotto la gronda della torre antica, Granada tierra ensangrentada en el torre de Toro. Maria, I've just met a girl named Maria.
In short, it was a great concert, and the audience in Rome weren't the only ones to think so. So if you're a classical publisher in 1990, you know that the market for your VHSs and CDs is smaller than those for pop releases. In general, if a VHS of a classical concert sells around 750,000 copies, that would be considered a modest success, and only a few releases by 1990 had ever crested the 1 million unit mark. So when the VHS release of Carreras Domingo Pavarotti in Concert sold upwards of 15 million copies, you would certainly take notice. The CD, in particular, went quintuple platinum in the US and would go on to win a 1991 Grammy for Best Classical Vocal Performance. Even today, 30 years later, it remains the best-selling classical album ever. There was some initial pushback against the album from aficionados, finding the more relaxed performance style out of context to be less worthwhile than the solo recordings each singer had already released. But for some, like New York Times writer Clyde Haberman, that just gave the album an identity of its own. Some might argue that the event smacked more of Caesar's Palace than Caesar's City, longer on the splashy than the artful, but no amount of grousing on this score could diminish the obvious enthusiasm of the performers as they ran through the regular program and 3 encores. And how did the tenors themselves react to this sudden and unexpected success? Well, in Domingo's case, with rage. See, Carreras, Domingo, Pavarotti, and Meta had been paid an undisclosed salary for their performances, as well as a portion of ticket revenue, the latter of which, as said, they donated to charity. However, when it came to the recordings, producer Mario Draghi only offered them a flat fee for the right to record them, which, expecting the recording would sell the normal amount, they accepted and also donated to charity. So, when the recordings exploded in popularity, Decca was not obligated to pay the tenors any percentage of the gross. This infuriated Placido Domingo, who not only believed he was owed a cut of the profits, but also suspected that Pavarotti, who had an existing record contract with Decca, had been secretly paid under the table. Pavarotti and his lawyer denied any payment having been made, but regardless, Domingo was really not interested in working with Draghi again. That meant that the door was open for another producer to enter the picture, which was exactly what Tibor Rudas aimed to do. Rudas was an influential figure in the classical world already, pioneering a new trend of performing classical acts in distinctly non-classical settings. Most famously, when given the task of booking musical guests for the Resorts Casino Hotel in Atlantic City, Rudas eventually got tired of booking pop singers and, in 1980, brought in the New York Philharmonic. He also had a prior relationship to Luciano Pavarotti, having similarly convinced him to give a concert in Las Vegas in 1983, and having continued to produce his solo concerts since then. Rudas immediately began asking when the group could unite for another concert together, but they balked at the idea. Partly because of the desire to let the first concert stand on its own, as well as the practical matter of their busy and conflicting schedules. Remember, these were not just singers and a conductor. These were 4 of the most well-respected artists working in the classical world, with opera and orchestra contracts extending years into the future. Any attempt to reunite them would have to have a pretty solid reason for doing so. Well, as it turns out, Domingo would discover one a few years later. When he learned that the next World Cup, in 1994, would be held in the United States, with the final match in Los Angeles, he went straight to FIFA executives to pitch a reunion of the 3 singers. However, he learned that someone else had gotten there first.
I went to talk to the World Cup people to propose to them, let's make the concert. When I went to talk to them and said, Mr. Rudas has already the rights. So I said, well, fine. He has the rights, here we are.
As it happened, Rudas had sidestepped FIFA and gone straight to the LA organizers as early as 1992, being awarded the exclusive rights to program the closing entertainment for the World Cup. Said Rudas, the tenors thought it was a great one-time event, and they wanted to keep it that way. But I knew that if I told them it would be an official part of the World Cup, the first concert was not, it was just coincidental, they would agree. Turns out, he was right. By the way, if you're wondering how Placido Domingo was able to go straight to FIFA executives before, it's because he was serving at the time on FIFA's ethics committee. Bit of a tangent, but I just needed to mention it because it surprised me that FIFA has an ethics committee. When the concert was formally announced in April 1994, it was given the title of Encore the 3 Tenors by Rudas, the first time that brand name was used. Of course, there were actually 4 artists reuniting for the concert: Carreras, Domingo, Pavarotti, and Meta. He's literally on the poster and the CD case. No word on his response to being left out of the title, but the tenors were, again, unequivocal about Meta's importance to the concert.
This is the main reason why this is going to happen again, because we all believe, the 4 of us, in this concert to be a success again.
While Meta was busy wrangling the LA Philharmonic, as well as the entire LA Opera chorus, and Lalo Schifrin began work on the new musical arrangements, Rudas turned his attention to the venue. Having turned down locations like the Hollywood Bowl and the LA Forum for being too small, both have less than 18,000 seats, Rudas settled on the natural amphitheater of LA's Dodger Stadium. Capacity 56,000, and that's before counting the seats that would be added on the field.
This is the first time in the history of the stadium that they have ever allowed an audience to sit on the infield.
To make the venue feel more high class, Rudolph commissioned a massive quarter-mile-long, 5-story high stage, based on the architecture of his native Budapest. Constructed in Hungary before being shipped in pieces to LA, the set contained a hand-painted palm tree backdrop, hundreds of potted trees and ferns, 20 columns lining the stage, and 2 man-made waterfalls, which were so loud they had to be turned off during the concert itself. In fact, the price tag was so high, Rudolph claimed that even if the concert sold out, he wouldn't be able to make a profit from ticket sales alone. Despite ticket prices rising to $1,012 on the high end, the concert did sell out, while also selling an absolute truckload of memorabilia, from CDs to t-shirts to autographed baseballs. And that's just the sales in the stadium that night. Adding in the revenue from the filmed recording of the performance, which was released on VHS as well as screened constantly on TV, the concert ended up bringing in a profit of over $12.5 million, of which the tenors happily took a cut. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We need to discuss the LA concert in a bit more detail, because despite being billed as an encore of 1990, the two concerts could not be more different. The decisions around what to sing in LA were the result of ongoing arguments between Rudolph, Mehta, Schifrin, and the three singers. This time, there would be a more concrete structure. Each singer would perform 2 solos, followed by a medley of songs sung by all 3. After the intermission, that same pattern would repeat. However, this didn't guarantee that the solos wouldn't change at the last minute. As in, songs were still being swapped out less than 48 hours before the concert, after the programs had already been reprinted. Twice. And the medleys were certainly, bold. The first, entitled A Tribute to Hollywood, is comprised of popular songs that are certainly more recent than most opera. The Act 2 medley, entitled Around the World, also leans more towards popular music, though with a more international bent. Okay, mostly international.
I like to be in America, everything in America, everything in America.
Regarding the song choices, Placido Domingo responded, "The purists, they say this is not opera. Of course it's not opera. It doesn't pretend to be an opera. It's a concert in which we sing some opera, we sing some songs, we do some zarzuela, then we do a medley of songs. If it was exclusively a concert of opera, maybe not so many people would come. We respect very much when people criticize it. That's fine. They shouldn't come, you know?" One of those critics was Martin Bernheimer, music critic for the LA Times. In a trio of reviews, he gave his own acerbic take on the concert, writing,
"It would have been easy to dismiss this sing-along tenor show as a low-calorie bagatelle if the pretensions hadn't been so high. However, this patchwork program, unevenly performed and grotesquely distorted via very loud loudspeakers, was heralded as the concert of the century. It probably was, moreover, the most costly concert of the century. In the final analysis, the singing seemed virtually irrelevant. This was a night for celebrating personalities and personality cults. This was a night for self-congratulation en masse, and a night for making, as well as spending, a lot of money. It certainly wasn't a night for serious art."
Harsh words, but perhaps he was offended by the more commercial aspects of this concert, in comparison to the charitable, more casual 1990 Oh, he reviewed that one as well?
The three pirates of the high seas seemed to be in a jovial mood for their multi-zillion-dollar reunion. They did a lot of mutual hugging, along with a lot of mutual mugging. Occasionally, they pretended to be self-effacing. As cameras ground away, some microphones recorded the historic orgy for a grateful posterity, and for a grateful commercial industry.
Jesus, dude, okay. The audience in LA included more than a few well-known names. Former first couple George and Barbara Bush, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Whoopi Goldberg, David Hasselhoff, and of course, America's sweetheart, Tipper Gore.
It's absolutely fantastic, really beyond my expectations. It's just very moving, very beautiful.
The celebs, incidentally, led to one of the best moments of the concert, watching Gene Kelly and Frank Sinatra react as the tenors covered their most famous songs. It's also clear that this concert had much more intense rehearsals than the 1990 concert. In comparison to Rome, where all the songs came from the repertoire of the singers, there was a lot more music that needed to be learned for LA. And after a final dress rehearsal that went not fantastic, the tenors and Mehta had to put in another unplanned rehearsal to ensure the medleys didn't flop. You can definitely see them relying on the music stands more than they did in Rome. They didn't even use them for the solos in Rome. In the end, however, the concert was a smash success. On VHS, the LA concert sold 8 million copies, and on CD, it was classified quintuple platinum in the US and was nominated for Album of the Year at the Grammys. Not Best Classical Album, mind. Album of the Year. Nominated alongside Eric Clapton and Seal. They lost to Tony Bennett. But even without the second Grammy, the three tenors were now fundamentally a cultural mainstay. While the television audience for Rome had been around 800 million people, estimates for the LA concert are around 1.3 billion, more than 1 in 5 people on Earth at the time. And it's in the aftermath of this 1994 concert that the cultural references mentioned earlier come into being. Animaniacs in 95, Seinfeld in 97, as well as references in Friends in 97 and Frasier in 98.
For you and Emily, tonight, Die Fledermaus.
Oh, right.
I think you'll like it. It has 2 out of the 3 tenors.
Okay.
All of this, naturally, fueled speculation about a third Three Tenors concert, presumably to take place before the 1998 World Cup final in France. When asked whether it was being planned, Rudash said, "All I can tell you is definitely, if we do anything at all, it won't be before the 1998 World Cup. But if these three are still in business, then we might come back." Which is fascinating to hear because only minutes before walking out on stage in LA, Luciano Pavarotti had turned to Carreras and Domingo and asked, and this is a direct quote, "Why not doing this around the world?" So here's where we're at in the summer of 1995. There have been, to this point, 2 concerts featuring the three tenors. Thibaut Rudash already has plans for another concert in 1998, and the 4 main artists are still working a difficult, complex schedule of performances as solo artists. That's where the story would likely jump forward 3 years, were it not for another producer. While Rudash had worked with Pavarotti on solo concerts, Matthias Hoffmann was the producer working with both Carreras and Domingo. As it turns out, he had also reached out to FIFA to organize the 1994 concert, but, like everyone else, was scooped by Rudash getting there first. But in the interim before Rudash's next concert, Hoffmann had another trick up his sleeve, taking the three tenors on a world tour. And it's here, in this moment in history before the tenors embark on their first international tour, that I find myself having to stop and reflect on how this all began, how pure the intentions behind the first concert were, how much fun the participants had during it, how well that first CD sold. The more I research the three tenors phenomenon, the more I find myself interested at this crossroads. What would have happened if there had only been 2 three tenors concerts? Or what if the three tenors had become some sort of niche group that only performed at the World Cup final? Because that was part of it, right? That the three singers loved football so much they wanted to be part of the tournament, that was the whole reason they agreed to a second concert in the first place. There's a telling line in a 1996 preview article by Leslie Candell before the tour stop in East Rutherford, New Jersey. It discusses the economics of the tour and includes this quote. "Production expenses total $90 million, said a spokesman for Hoffman Concerts in New York. But with $1 million in local expenses, each concert costs about $10 million. Nothing goes to charity this time around." And in the first draft of this script, this was going to be a much longer section about how the initial plans for a 5-stop tour were expanded to a 13-stop tour, how the tenors were guaranteed $1.5 million per concert, how ticket sales began to trickle off as the tour went on, the cancellation of the Houston performance due to low ticket sales, the middling reviews for their 1998 World Cup concert in Paris, the suit filed by the German government accusing Hoffman and the tenors of tax evasion, which ended with Hoffman going to jail, the Christmas album they recorded in Vienna, jingle all the way, Pavarotti beginning to sing Nessun Dorma down a half step to preserve his voice, the fact that the 2002 World Cup concert in Yokohama wasn't even released on CD at all, I wanted to write about all of that before I realized that synopsis I just gave paints a better picture than I could with the details. The final Three Tenors concert was in September 2003 in Columbus, Ohio. Following that concert, Carreras, Domingo, and Pavarotti would never sing as a trio again. There was one attempt to reunite in 2005, but Pavarotti's fading health led to his departure and replacement by Mexican tenor Alejandro Fernandez. Meanwhile, the news broke that Domingo's suspicions of Decca paying Pavarotti in 1990 were actually true. Pavarotti was paid $1.5 million under the table. The 2006 World Cup, then, was the first in 16 years to not feature a performance by the Three Tenors. However, Plácido Domingo did perform during the opening ceremony. Hey everyone, just a quick update. When I was doing research for this video, I discovered I need to make two quick corrections to the last few things that I said. First of all, the event that Plácido Domingo sang at the beginning of the 2006 World Cup wasn't the opening ceremony. It was a separate concert that took place about 3 days before the ceremony began. That's the footage that you just saw. And secondarily, I discovered that 2 days before the World Cup final in 2006, there was another concert that Plácido Domingo took part in, which also featured the tenor Rolando Villazón and the soprano Anna Netrebko, singing together a slate of classical music. So it was not a Three Tenors concert, and the other two tenors didn't take part in anything with the World Cup that year, but I figured I should give the full story and a clarification there, so that's a quick update. And after Pavarotti's death the following year, any chances of a Three Tenors reunion concert were formally snuffed out. Oh, wait, there is actually one detail that does need to be mentioned. During the initial planning for the first world tour, it became clear that Meta's commitments as chief conductor for the Maggio Musicale Fiorentino would make it impossible for him to join. Unsure of how to proceed, the tenors suggested possibly canceling or scaling back the tour, but Hoffman, who had already booked the venues, urged them to find a replacement. The tenors settled on Met Opera conductor James Levine.
I'm flying on a magic carpet with them. Nothing goes wrong. I have, as an accompanist there, as a man who makes music with them, I have such a confidence that sometimes when you work either with a soloist, instrumental, or a singer, you feel, well, you have to be careful in case something goes wrong. With them, it just doesn't happen.
Both Carreras and Domingo are still alive as of this video's release, although neither has performed since 2019. For Carreras, that comes following a farewell concert tour and formal retirement. For Domingo, that comes due to accusations of sexual misconduct that led to his resignation from the LA Opera and subsequent blacklisting by the Met, only a few years after the same happened to Levine. But while the Three Tenors are no more, their spirit lives on in the army of imitators that have sprung up from the mid-90s all the way to the present day. An incomplete list of similar groups includes 3 Irish tenors, the 3 Welsh tenors, 3 Chinese tenors, 3 tenors from the Holy Land, 3 Mo tenors, 10 tenors, the Canadian tenors, which are now just renamed the Tenors, 3 sopranos, organized by Tibor Rudas, Celtic Woman, Il Volo, Il Divo, and solo artists like Andrea Bocelli and Josh Groban. To be clear, this subgenre of operatic pop, also known as popera or stadium classical, did not, as it is sometimes claimed, begin with the Three Tenors. As far back as the 1950s, Mario Lanza was an operatic tenor who became a film star, releasing singles of both arias and contemporary hits in his signature vocal style. And even earlier than that, Enrico Caruso was one of the first opera singers to release singles of his arias, gaining commercial success as early as 1902. There's also the distinguishing factor that the Three Tenors were working opera stars. Say what you will about Andrea Bocelli, a man with a successful music career and a beautiful voice, but he doesn't perform roles at La Scala. Carreras, Domingo, and Pavarotti had prior credibility in their field that their imitators, for the most part, continue to lack. Despite the belief that their concerts would bring new audiences into the opera house, a claim often made to dissuade critics, What the Three Tenors actually proved was that popera was a genre with an audience of its own, distinct from traditional opera. This particular niche in the music industry would not exist in its current form without the trail blazed by the Three Tenors, which is, in itself, an accomplishment. But there's a question still remaining. Considering how unexpected the success of the Three Tenors was, is it possible that something like this could happen again? Well, it depends on how we define what happened to the Three Tenors. If we're saying, could another supergroup of popular musicians align like this and become commercially successful, it's possible. You could pull together the three biggest names in a genre not seen as commercially viable and hope that an audience emerges for them. Pop Zydeco, or Pop Vaudeville, or Pop Igbo Highlife. Of course, the challenges of finding a known musician in a lesser-known genre are obvious. Then again, part of the Three Tenors' appeal was hearing high-class music in something as casual as a stadium concert. Maybe you get Mstislav Rostropovich, Jacqueline Dupre, and Yo-Yo Ma to tour together as the Three Cellists. I know that two of them are dead, but imagine if they were all alive today. Who are the best-known living cellists? Tina Guo? If we go outside the realm of music, perhaps the logical successor to the Three Tenors is something like a 3-on-3 basketball team, where the 6 competitors are the 6 best-known players in the country, touring and playing each other over and over. Perhaps the closest we've come, arguably, to replicating an event like that 1990 concert in Rome was in 2010, with the Sondheim 80th birthday concert, also known as the Ladies in Red concert, just due to the sheer magnitude of the artists involved. It was one night, and they didn't tour afterwards, but then again, it was only when the Three Tenors began touring that the spark of joy from that initial concert in Rome began to fade. There's something tragic in the story of the Three Tenors, in that something that began as a welcome back concert for Jose Carreras could be warped into such a capitalist leviathan that Seinfeld could make a joke about knowing the trio, but not knowing them individually. Watching the spontaneity of that original improvised O Sole Mio ending, and then watching it replicated, fully rehearsed, 12 years later, it casts a harsh light on how tired the tenors look by the end, how what had started as a hobby had slowly become a hustle. The surprise popularity of the 1990 concert did not necessarily guarantee an encore performance. As said, the tenors themselves were hesitant to give one. And in practice, while the LA concert was successful, it was much more of a capital P production than the Rome concert was. Bigger audience, larger set, more expensive. The only measurement of the LA concert that was less than the Rome concert was how much money was raised for Carreras' charity. And that's before we even get into how the tour further ground the tenors down over time, to the point where their final World Cup concert in Yokohama wasn't released on CD or DVD. The popera audience that they had helped to build had moved on. In closing, I'm left wondering what the impact of the Three Tenors would have been if there had been only 2 concerts, in Rome and LA. Would the group be remembered as well today for 2 best-selling albums? Would they still have sparked a legion of imitators, keeping the stadium classical genre alive today? How would those 2 nights have affected our perception of the artists involved? And, most importantly, would the trio still have been parodied on Animaniacs? Well, for the last question, yes. That parody premiered a month before the tour was announced. But to the other observations, it's impossible to know for certain. But to any artists out there who suddenly find themselves achieving mainstream success, thrust into the spotlight by an audience demanding to know what your next move is going to be, to those people, these may be worthwhile questions to ask, and the case of the Three Tenors, a precedent that deserves your attention.
Bella nuit, ô nuit d'amour souris à nos ivresses, nuit plus douce que les jours